Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and yes, that's right, folks. We're back with the Truth Attack. So, I got a number of things I want to get it through tonight, so let's just get right into this. We are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening audience to keep the network broadcasts operating. Keep the broadcast network operating, and we sure do appreciate it if you could find your way over to the libertyworksradionetwork.com website. If you're not already there, listening online on the online listening link there on the website, and get signed up as a subscribing member, even if it's as little as $10, $20 a month. Every membership helps, and we do need your support to keep the shows and the shows coming and the network operating. So it's libertyworksradionetwork.com. And if you enjoy my favorite topic, which is the maladministration of the income tax by the IRS, the DOJ, and the federal courts for the last 75 years as a direct tax on labor when no such taxing power exists under the Constitution, well, then you ought to find your way over to taxfreedom.com and start reading, get educated, because the dominoes are falling. The taxes are going to end here very soon. There's no way it can survive what the Supreme Court has already written and done. And we're going to talk about that more tonight, but let's look at what's happening with current events first. Okay, we got 100 days of Donald Trump in office, and he's there taking questions every single day for an hour or two. What a change from Joe Biden, who hid from the press for 4 years and never took any questions from anyone unless they were scripted. He was given the question beforehand and they were told not to alter the question being posed to the president because there's only going to be one or two, and then he walks away like the coward he is. So Trump is there every day taking questions, and he's already gone about resetting everything that needed to be reset. He's bringing down the price of energy and oil. He's stopped we need a new law to control the border nonsense. The border is now controlled. They're getting less than a couple of dozen a day as opposed to the thousands they were getting every day beforehand. The criminal cartels don't have free access anymore. The criminal cartel gang members that have been terrorizing the people on the streets of America are being arrested and removed as fast as they can be identified and taken away. The Democrats are defending them. Bring the criminal gangs back. Bring them back. Due process. They're illegal aliens. There's a different level of due process given to that criminal event than citizens get in the courtroom. Besides, they're all getting their due process. They're only arresting, for the most part, people that have already had decisions handed down by judges in the immigration courts, or who blew off their hearing and didn't show up. And that alone is sufficient due process to arrest them and get them out. So he's cleaning up the cartels. He's cleaning up the crime on the city streets, which are getting better. He's leveling the world global trade field. And of course, this is the thing that most upset the Democrats. Oh, tariffs, he'll destroy everything. Putting the tariffs in place is simply a negotiation tactic to negotiate from a position of strength. The problem for the world's economy for the last 50 years is that America has been funding the rest of the world's development through debt-based consumption, while American products were not allowed to be sold in foreign countries because of the tariffs those countries had on our products. European tariffs on American wine, chicken, cattle. You got Canadian tariffs on American dairy. You got Japanese tariffs on American rice. All over the planet, foreign countries had huge tariffs to lock out our products, which would compete very effectively in those places. while being given by our government unlimited and unfettered access to dump as much as their low-cost produced merchandise as they could into the American consumer market. And China, of course, is the guilty party there, producing lots and lots of cheap stuff with slave labor and then being allowed to sell it into the U.S. Well, the U.S. is absolutely prohibited from doing anything in China unless there's a Chinese partner that gets to loot the intellectual property of the company. So Trump is resetting everything, and of course there's going to be some initial shock to the system when you instigate the tariffs and indicate we're resetting global trade. We're not going to accept $37 trillion in debt and growing and continuing to exist with an unbalanced, unlevel, unfair playing field in the world trade markets. So by imposing the tariffs, he's forcing the other nations to the table, and it's already succeeded. 30 different countries have already come to Washington, D.C. to negotiate trade deals where Trump will insist they lower or remove their tariffs on American goods in exchange for his removing the tariff imposed on theirs. It's tit for tat. Give a little, get a little. And without the tariffs, what did America have to give? We'd already given up everything and let them take advantage of the situation for 50 years. And Donald Trump is right, it's unacceptable and can't go on. Ron Paul is right, it's unacceptable and can't go on. We're at 36.7 trillion, headed for 40. Unless you do something to control the running of the debt, the running out of the currency, the monetizing of the debt, you're going to be in real serious trouble. But Trump has already reduced the inflation rates back down to the 2.2 or 3% they were hoping to get. He's brought the price of oil and energy down to the futures are trading at $58 a barrel, $64 on the market today. And energy, of course, as I've said before repeatedly, energy is the key to your entire economy. Energy is everything. It's your workers, it's your transportation, it's your transports, it's your vehicles, it's the lights, it's the heat, it's the energy is everything. When energy is cheap, the economy booms. When energy is expensive, people can't even afford to get to work 5 days a week. So bringing down energy will bring back economy. It will also help to lower prices because prices went up based on the cost of energy being tacked on as a surcharge to every single product being delivered by a diesel truck or produced in a factory with energy. When energy goes up, every single level of the production cycle costs more money. It costs more at the farm, it costs more getting the goods from the farm to the processing center, it costs more to process them, it costs more to move them from the processing center to the stores or distribution centers, it costs more to move them to the distribution centers to the stores, it costs more for the customers to get to the stores to buy the products, and the electric bills of all the institutions involved are all higher for lighting, heat, and AC, and refrigeration for a lot of products. So when energy is up, everything is more expensive, and that's what Joe Biden apparently was completely oblivious to and unresponsive to as a reality. So things are already looking better. The stock market has leveled out around 40,000. It dropped a little bit lower than that, but came back almost immediately because, as I've said before, there's still $5 trillion sitting on the sidelines waiting for a buy-in opportunity at the bottom of the market. And I think they've already missed it, which means that when these trade deals start getting announced and when the earnings from these tech companies, which aren't going to subside, get announced as good earnings, the market's going to start to take off again the same way it did before. And it will go higher with each new trade deal that is signed and implemented with Japan, South Korea, India, Europe, and of course, eventually China, who wants to pretend like they're all big and tough, but in reality needs to sign a deal. China needs to be able to sell into our market a lot more than we need to sell into theirs. What China buys from us primarily is energy and food. Go ahead, put tariffs on that. Let's see how many people starve and how many cities have the lights go out because there's no food and no energy because the Chinese government raised the price of it to their own people with tariffs. And they have no alternative. On the other hand, in America, tariffs won't hurt the American consumer because they have alternative product choices. You don't have to buy the Chinese goods. You can buy goods from Mexico. You can buy goods from South Korea. You can buy goods from Taiwan. You can buy goods from Japan. You don't have to buy from their countries. There are lots of choices, and the best ones, of course, would be the domestic producer. They're not subject to any tariff at all, regardless of whether or not the country of origin has signed a deal. So the economy is going to come out of it, and what Trump is doing is the right thing to do. And I still say, what those should have done is cut 1.4 trillion out of the budget by eliminating entirely the departments of education, energy, agriculture, transportation, housing, environmental protection, occupational safety, labor, commerce, all of these useless agencies that are doing nothing but interfering in state functions should be eliminated completely or turned into a 10-man office inside the Department of the Interior. And then all of those budget dollars should be distributed proportionate to the census to the 50 states so that the money can be spent out of the state capitals to stimulate economy all over the country in all 50 states instead of just in Washington, D.C., and let the multinational corporations that control the lobbies win all the contracts. Why don't we give some of that money to the state capitals and let them spend the money to improve infrastructure, energy, agriculture, education, healthcare, housing, labor, environment. All of those things are state functions, and the Fed needs to get rid of the federal money budget, slash it 10% every year till the budget is balanced, and distribute those reduced funds to the states. They won't mind the 10% reduction. Last year they got nothing. So Trump is on the right path, and of course, Doge is capable of doing a lot more, but they won't let them operate under a constitutional foundation premise. As if you look at the constitutional foundation for all of these things, it doesn't exist, and that eliminates the budget immediately. So, what else? Oh, okay. Today, yesterday, one or the other, Ukraine and the U.S., I guess that was this morning, Ukraine and the U.S. signed a deal on the mineral rights in Ukraine. So that puts the U.S. in business with the Ukraine. And the Russians have, of course, I believe I heard the other day, Putin agreed to a 3-day truce. So it looks like a peace in the Ukraine might be developing. With this agreement being signed, the U.S. is going to have a presence and an interest there. To what extent it will be profitable, who knows, but it is strategic and tactical because by putting U.S. presence and interest there, they will cause Putin to reconsider any further incursions because the areas where the minerals are actually very close to where the conflict lines have been drawn for the last couple of years, basically. So you got a deal with Ukraine. Hopefully it will bring an end to the Ukrainian war, which Trump, of course, promised to do, and he's been trying to fulfill on. They were supposed to have a deal a couple of months ago, but Zelensky blew that up for some reason. And in China, they're entering a recession. The factories are shutting down. The loss of the market in the U.S. is already having an impact in China, so that's why I say they're going to have to come to the table too. And Trump is going to get a rewrite on all of that as well. And Lee Zeldin at the EPA is moving ahead with environmental deregulation, which should free a lot of companies from expenses that were hindering both expansion and production. So they're on the right path. And the Democrats have basically gone completely insane, collectively and individually. It's just unreal what the Democrats are doing. And of course, as I've said before, they've become the socialist party in America. There's no middle left in the Democrat Party. Okay, I think I hear the first commercial break coming up. So This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just get right back into this one. We left just before the commercial break. I was talking about how the Democrat Party has become the socialist party in America. There's no middle left in the party. It's been completely co-opted and taken over by the far left extreme youth progressive wing of the party, which is led by AOC, who is, of course, following Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Nancy Pelosi has been rendered irrelevant. Schumer is a joke. And who else is there leading the party? Joe Biden? Kamala Harris? Oh, that's right. Kamala is back. She's kind of disappeared since the election and getting wiped off the face of the map, losing the House, the Senate, the White House, popular vote, electoral college vote. It's, wipeout, absolute failure as a candidate. And now they're talking about she's the number one lead anticipated candidate for 28. Oh, there's a wise party for you. She couldn't win a single vote in the primaries. She got selected by the Democrats in a non-democratic process. While they're yelling and screaming about democracy, democracy, they're playing elitist appointment games and have been for a while. Biden was appointed in place of Hillary. Obama was appointed in place of Hillary. And Kamala was appointed in place of any primary election candidate. So it's the Democrats that have become the elitist dictators and party of tyrannical direction rather than democratic vote. And what else can, I've said for years, give me this democracy nonsense. These Democrat political leaders, and actually a few Republicans too, don't even know what form of government we have in this country. It's not a democracy. It's a constitutional republic. And the difference is that in a democracy, the majority rules. So 50.1% can cast 49.9% back into slavery. In a constitutional republic, the law rules, not the majority. So the majority can never impose its will on the minority, not even if it's 999 million to 1. The law controls everyone equally. That's the difference between a democracy and a republic. The majority doesn't rule in a republic, and it does in a democracy. And that's what they want you to accept as the principle that the majority rules, because they can create the appearance of a majority at any time they want to through their manipulation and control of the mainstream media and, of course, the TV and the cable programming that controls the minds of the population basically today. Jim Morrison said it in a song, right? Do you know you are ruled by TV? We are ruled by TV. So anyway, Kamala's back today, making a comeback speech. Kamala, the giggler. Again, the giggler. She's up on stage giggling away about how there's a video of the elephants at the San Diego Zoo when an earthquake hit, and how all the elephants immediately ran together and formed a circle to protect the most at-risk elements of the herd. Oh, she's giggling about it. Yeah, well, yeah, isn't it funny that the elephants pull together to create a wall to protect the most vulnerable elements of the herd, the youth. And the other point is, I don't believe I've ever seen the elephants import lions to feed on the youth, like Biden did and the Democrats did with the cartels. Invited all the criminals in and just let them walk across to feed off of and terrorize the American people. Oh, what nonsense. As I said, there's no middle left because there's no intelligence left in the Democratic Party. It's all fanatical nonsense based on emotional fraud. Emotional fraud. Oh, there are no abortions anymore. No, change states. Catch a bus. If you don't like your state's laws, change states. It's a state issue, not federal. So we got, and I saw same old nonsense, right? What's the Democrats' big idea? Is it to reduce energy or reduce interest rates or to improve trade or to stop crime or to help veterans get housing or to improve health? No, their big idea is to impeach Donald Trump again. Impeach Donald Trump. We need to win the midterm election to impeach Donald Trump, the only person in Washington, D.C. actually working for the American people instead of the existing operations, the de facto operations, which are as far removed from a de jure application of the law as is the devil removed from the Ten Commandments. So they got the same old nonsense, and Joe Biden, of course, is actually the source of all this problem because he, like I told you when he got into office 5 years ago, 4.5, that he was a mindless idiot. And that's exactly what's proven to be the case. He was a mindless idiot who had no idea what was going on inside his own White House. The whole thing, the whole administration was co-opted by the far left socialist cabal that ended up taking control of his administration from inside the White House and using the power of the auto pen to sign executive orders or have Joe sign orders that he didn't know he was signing or understand, to sign pardons for people that he probably didn't know existed, and to run every program in the government as a socialist takeover of private sector operations without regard for the crimes and criminal class of illegal aliens they were allowing to invade and molest and harass and terrorize American citizens all over the country, from New York to California. So the Democrats have just gone completely mindless. It's hard to understand how they think that this kind of rhetoric, which has got them, a 23% approval rating now, how they think continuing it can do any good. It literally is Trump derangement syndrome. They have completely lost their minds and are obsessed with the man and no longer care about the policies or America or their constituents or the situation or the price of goods or the price of energy or the price of oil, it's just nothing but opposing any changes proposed by Trump and the Republican Party. They want to raise taxes. They want to let tax cuts that Trump put in place in 2017 expire. And that will cause a recession if all those old tax rates that are higher on everyone come back. And the deduction is lessened again, lowered substantially. That will impact the poorest people the most. So the Democrats are threatening to allow the most vulnerable to be used again. And they have no other proposal. Okay, I think that's enough with current events. Let's switch over a little bit and talk about the misapplication of the income tax. I started last week talking about how every state in the country, basically, practically all of them, have hinged their application of the state income tax has been hinged on the application of the federal income tax. So that most of the state laws are written that you don't need to file a state return, or rather you only need to file a state return if you are required to file a federal return, and that the state taxes the same gross income as defined in the Internal Revenue Code under Section 61, gross income. So, if you listened to the show before, you know that Section 61 was originally implemented not in 1913 as part of the original income tax laws, but in 1918 as part of an income tax imposed on citizens living and working in Canada under the tax treaty that was the original legislative act out of which Section 61 arose. It was, of course, Section 22A at the time. But the point being is that when it was moved, recodified from 22A to Section 61 in 1954, it was done so in a manner so that the source of the original legislation was removed from the regular publication of the law, so that the fact that it had a limited application only to Canadian sources of gross income earned by a citizen living and working in Canada and did not apply domestically. And in fact, this belief came out of a Supreme Court decision. It's a Glenshaw Glass, Commissioner v. Glenshaw Glass in 1955, where the court ruled that all of the sources of gross income allowed Congress to tax all accessions to wealth and began applying it as though it were a direct tax under the 16th Amendment, which included the taxing power to tax labor, which is all wrong and erroneous, rather than the limited use of income to measure the amount of tax owed on the activities or earnings derived from activities or transactions subject to an impost on foreign activity, a duty on exported goods, or an excise on commodities, licenses, or corporations. See, there was no taxation of labor previous to the 16th Amendment. There was no taxation of the labor of the American people under the original Income Tax Act. It only taxed the labor of foreign persons. That's Code Sections 1441, 1442, and 1443 if you want to look it up. And it was only those foreign persons that were subject to the collection of the income tax from 1913 through 1942 unless you worked in Canada, where you were subject to tax there under the treaty. But no one paid the tax on the labor in the 50 states until we got to the victory tax, which was a direct tax and unconstitutional, but nobody challenged it. When it expired, they continued the withholding without imposing any further tax. So you have a tax imposed in 1913 that's collected from foreigners, not citizens. And in 1945, they allowed the collection of the tax to continue from citizens by allowance, signing the W-4. And the states, of course, have been piggybacking that application since 1960. So it's all based on a maladministration of the tax as a direct tax without limitation that reaches labor, the American people, under authority, allegedly, of the 16th Amendment. And of course, the Supreme Court said last year and more that no, it's not a direct tax under the 16th Amendment at all. It's an indirect tax under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Now, what that means is that there's no taxation of labor of the American people. The whole thing's been a constitutional fraud alleged under that direct tax authority of the 16th Amendment, wrongfully created initially by the Supreme Court in this Glenshaw Glass case, the same way that this liberal Supreme Court of this era created the imaginary right to abortion under Roe v. Wade, the imaginary power of the bureaucracy to write its own laws through regulations that went beyond what Congress authorized in law under Chevron. And of course, you had the affirmative action cases as well come out of this liberal court. And so far, the Supreme Court has thrown away Roe v. Wade. They've thrown away Chevron with Loper Bright. And they've thrown away affirmative action. And the last part of throwing away the liberal decisions that have torn this country apart since 1960 is this Glenshaw Glass decision, where it's got to go. There's no basis to tax salaries and wages and compensation of American citizens in the 50 states by impost, duty, or excise. Those sources of earnings come from and are derived from the exercise of a right, not any taxable privilege like incorporation or licensing. So when this direct tax falls, so too do the state taxes. And we're going to talk some more about that when we get back. I hear the commercial break. We'll be back in 5. This is Thomas Freed. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is a Truth Attack Hour, and I'm just going to get right back into this. When the commercial break came up, I was talking about how all the states have piggybacked their income tax on the federal income tax. And most of their statutes specifically state that if you have a requirement to file a federal return, then you have a requirement to file a state return, and the state return has to include all the gross income with some minor exceptions as you had determined gross income for your federal return. And gross income, of course, is Section 61, which, as I've said, has no application to the domestic labor of American citizens. It's only been treated that way since it was maladministered as a direct tax under Glenshaw Glass in 1955. And that maladministration has been pursued. But when the direct taxation foundation, alleged, goes away, there is no basis under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 to tax the labor of the American people indirectly by impost, duty, or excise. So when the Supreme Court says last year and more that income taxes are indirect taxes and that direct taxes must be apportioned to the states, they're telling you that the last 55, 60 years of enforcement have been a constitutional fraud. There is no indirect authority to tax labor. Indirect taxes tax by impost foreign persons, foreign activity, and foreign imports, not citizens, not domestic activity. Duties tax exported goods, not domestic activity, and excises tax licenses, corporations, and commodities, not domestic activity that doesn't involve alcohol, tobacco, firearms, or petroleum fuels, the commodities subject to tax. There is no basis to tax the labor of the American people. When the 16th Amendment direct tax argued foundational authority, erroneously argued for the last 60 years, when that goes away under Moore, everything starts to collapse. All the dominoes fall. No direct tax means it is indirect. Indirect means there's no scope of taxation that reaches domestic labor. Section 61 can no longer be the basis for an indirect tax because sources of income aren't a basis for taxation by impost, duty, or excise. So it falls both at the federal level and the state level. The income tax is dead. All you have to do is argue these things in front of a jury and put them in front of a court in proper motions, and an honest judge has to dismiss everything. Of course, there aren't any honest judges. They've been socialist, communist dirtbags since the 60s with respect to tax law, and particularly so since the 80s, when they've been fining people upwards of $40,000 for properly arguing the Constitution and being prohibited from doing so in front of a jury. Absolute criminal sedition by the federal judges for 50 years. And we finally got a Supreme Court with the guts to start fixing these things. And let's look at what they've already done, because as I point out, the only liability for tax in Subtitle A, the original body of law enacted in 1913, is the liability of the withholding agents as collectors, who, like the employers in Subtitle C of 1945, 32 years later, are the only parties made liable for the payment of the tax in the subtitle. Only the collectors are made liable, the same way a store is made liable for collection and payment of a sales tax, not the customer, who's not required to pay tax to the state treasury. That's the store. And the income tax is an indirect tax in the form of a tariff collected from foreigners and an excise collected from corporations and license holders. There never was a direct tax. And the liability, the statutory liability for payment of the tax that exists in written law in Subtitle A, the original body of law enacted in 1913 as the original income tax legislation of the Underwood-Simmons Tariff Act of October 3rd, 1913, that statutory liability is laid in the name of the withholding agent, the collector, under Section 1461, and there is no liability in statute for the payment of the tax by any other party, including the wage earner or the recipient of interest, dividends, tips, commissions, annuities, etc., etc., etc. No liability exists in statute. So how is it possible that the government has been collecting this tax from people who aren't liable for it, since liability for tax is one of the number one precedents necessary to enforce tax against someone alleged to owe it? It can only be alleged to owe it if they're liable for the payment of it, and liable by statute, because the courts can only enforce what is in the statutes. And the only thing that's in the statute is the liability of the collector under Section 1461. That's all. So how has the government been enforcing a liability for tax since 1955 or 1960 or 1980? They've been doing it through Chevron, regulatory deference. The IRS wrote a regulation for Section 1, tax imposed, that says you're liable for the tax. It says that in the regulation. But the statute says there's a rate of tax imposed on taxable income. So who's liable for that? Who's liable for a rate of tax on taxable income? It doesn't say the wage earner is liable. It just says there will be a rate of tax on taxable income of married, individual, head to household. Well, where does the government get the constitutional authority to tax married, individual, or heads of household? Where's that? They're not corporations or licensed persons or foreign persons. Where's the jurisdiction to tax by married? Where's the statutory specification in Section 1 of a liability for tax? It isn't there. It never was, because it's not a direct tax that the wage earner is liable for. There's a rate of tax, and then there's a duty to collect the tax from payments made to persons subject to the collection of it. And then there's a duty by the earner to pay the rate of tax applicable to their earnings, which generally means they get a refund because they withhold more than is owed. But it's only the collector that's liable in statute, and it's only through regulations that they allege the individual is liable for tax under Section 1, the tax imposed. But guess what, folks? Loper Bright destroys Chevron's ability to replace statute with regulation. They're not allowed to claim you're liable under the regulation if you argue there's no statutory liability in the written statute. And without the statute providing it, the regulation can no longer be deemed to do it. And this is the liability they've invented and made up under the bureaucratic regulatory deference of Chevron that let them invent a direct liability for an indirect tax that the worker has no liability to pay. Because all direct taxes cannot be enforced against any individual. They must be apportioned to the states for a payment in proportion to the census. This is the other thing that the Supreme Court just reaffirmed and reasserted in Moore about all direct taxes. They must be apportioned. So this nonsense for the last 50 years of a non-apportioned direct tax on all sources of gross income has been constitutional fraud. Implementing not any form of constitutional taxation, but only the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, which reads a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. That's where you find income taxation. That's where you find graduated taxation. There's no graduated taxation allowed in the Constitution. It has to be uniform. And graduated tax brackets are based on the power of Congress to discriminate against the inanimate corporations, the licensed person, the foreign person, and the inanimate commodities and articles of commerce subject to taxation. But what power does Congress have to discriminate against citizens? None. None whatsoever. Geographical uniformity doesn't apply to citizens. Absolute uniformity is required with respect to citizens. You can't divide the citizens into upper, middle, and lower classes and write different tax rates, tax law for the different classes. That's class warfare. It's prohibited. Uniformity in all tax law is required. The Supreme Court wrote this all up in 1896. You can't do this. It's communism, enslaving the people, allowing the government to control the means of production, one of which is labor. Labor, capital, factory, land. And that leads to energy, the means of production. It's not constitutional taxation. It hasn't been constitutional taxation since the end of World War II. And it is that and this income tax system that has divided the American people and led us to this class warfare we see violently playing out in the streets of America every time the Democrats lose a debate or an election. Oh, I wanted to mention that on the state side of things, many of the states have become so dependent upon this you made, you owe. It's a direct tax because the federal government says salaries, wages, and compensation are taxable in the state. They become so dependent upon this, they don't even provide judicial oversight anymore. Many of the states are using what I think and what appears to be are bills of attainder, where they assess the tax and then go file a lien as a judgment without any due process or judicial oversight. Now, a bill of attainder is an act where a legislature proclaims guilt by virtue of the enactment of the law without any judicial process being involved to provide due process at law required in all activities where the rights, properties, privileges of citizens or their deprivation of said is involved or at issue. Due process at law requires the opportunity to appear at least once before some legal or quasi-legal forum to speak in defense of your own rights, life, property, and or whatever else is threatened to be taken away. These are bills of attainder that summarily pronounce the judgment, the claim for a direct tax as a judgment. And they can all be defeated on said basis now that it's not a direct tax anymore, because there's no basis for a judgment for an indirect tax on foreign activity, licensed activity, commodities, or corporate activity. Domestic labor is not subject to any indirect impost, duty, or excise. That's why they had to make up the direct power to tax under the 16th Amendment that they've lied to you about for 75 years, because you can't get to labor by impost, duty, or excise unless it's the labor of the foreign person, as was done in 1913 through Code Sections 1441, 1442, and 1443. I said before, it's Code Section 1461, right there in that 14, 41, 42, 43, 61. They're all 1400 series code sections in Chapter 3, which is one of the 6 chapters that constitute Subtitle A of Title 26, which is the original income tax legislation enacted in 1913 under the Tariff Act, taxing foreign activity in America. It's never been a domestic tax. And the liability for tax is gone for both the states and the Fed in court. It's all been done under Chevron, which is now destroyed by Loper Bright.